the Old Testament book of Deuteronomy, Moses spends some time reminding the people of God of how good God has been to them and how they should give thanks for it. He reminds them of the unique love that he expressed for his people by delivering them from their slavery in Egypt. And of course, it's an image of the deliverance all of us have received from our own slavery to sin. And he says, you've been delivered from Egypt, and now you're being taken into the promised land. God will be good to the promises he's made. If he makes a promise, he'll keep it. So Moses is reminding the people of God that they are indeed blessed. Blessed even when they're in times of difficulty. But Moses goes on in Deuteronomy to say, be careful. When times are good, don't forget the source of the goodness. It is God and God alone. In Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 2, Moses writes, remember how the Lord your God led you all the way. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way. God indeed guides his people and has done it for centuries and centuries and centuries. In the 17th century, a similar journey as that made by the Israelites was made by a group of pilgrims who left Holland and went to England and then made their way to the New World of the Americas. They were seeking a place of liberty for themselves. They were the outcasts of Europe. They needed a new land, a new place to go. And in the face of great hardship and sickness, they made a weeks-long journey into the new land. This liberty they were looking for, they were by far not perfect people, the pilgrims. They were an assortment just like you and me of good and bad. The primary thing they were looking for was liberty, but they disagreed even among themselves on what that liberty would look like. For some, it'd be liberty under one religion enforced by the government. So they'd have the purity of their faith. For others, it would be a religion, whether it's one or many, that would have no government control over them. They were divided. At least they could agree on this: liberty for me, but not necessarily for thee. But liberty is what united them as they came into this new world. And these pilgrims endured much hardship when they landed at Plymouth Bluff, just as winter was setting in, and they had to quickly carve out of the forest, shelter for themselves to prevent the winter from overtaking them in the harshness of that. It's hard to believe, but over half the people who made that journey from Holland to England to Plymouth Bluff, over half of them died from the hardship of that trip. Yet, with survival as the primary order of the day, the writings of the pilgrims and their history reveals a deep faith that they had in God, where they continue to turn to him as the source of their blessings and the source of their strength. From their first landing of the Mayflower through the subsequent years of the little colony being started, they continue to gather each Sunday for prayer, meditation, singing of hymns, and to hear a sermon to remind them of their faith and the source of life to them. They did this in lean times, and they also did this in times of plenty as the years went by. They made it their practice to stop and give thanks to God at the beginning of each week. Even when the pilgrims were forced to cut their food rations in half, so that each person only received a half of what was actually considered needed for each day, William Bradford, a political leader of that day, committed that they were learning by experience the truths of Deuteronomy chapter 8. Deuteronomy chapter 8, remember the Lord your God who has led you all the way. Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. And when the years began to slowly bring more prosperity to the pilgrims, and they had the abundance of harvest, rather than telling God they could manage just fine now, they continued with the practice of thanksgiving, of setting aside a solemn day to give thanks to God for all the blessings that he had. Edward Winslow, who was another leader of that day, wrote about the times of plenty for them. And he said, having these many signs of God's favor and acceptance, we thought it would be a great ingratitude if secretly we should content ourselves with private thanksgiving only. He was saying, instead of just looking at my life and saying, things are good now, I have plenty, that all the people of God ought to come together for an occasion. And in their case, they were thinking in terms of a time of worship in their Sunday worship, where they could give thanks to God corporately for all the blessings that He had given them in their lives. What a wonderful example that the Pilgrims set for us in choosing gratitude, whether it was in times of plenty or in times of great want. Do you remember some desperate situations in your life when maybe the disappointments were so heavy that it made it difficult to even get out of bed? In those times, can you remember the strength you received when you practiced the discipline of gratitude? God, I'm grateful for what I do have. But also you might recall times of great provision. Unfortunately, our tendency then is to forget that God is the source of all blessings. But even in times of great provision, we need to pause and give thanks to God to express gratitude for what He's done for us. The Pilgrims were in the 1600s. Fast forward 200 years, and now the United States, a relatively young nation, is bitterly divided. People are polarized over some really important issues of the day. So much so that they break out into war. Brother is taking the blood of brother. North is versus the South. People are disillusioned about all the liberty they had sought in this country in forming it. And now they're in a very difficult time. And Abraham Lincoln declared right at the very end of the Civil War that there should be a national day of thanksgiving. Now try to picture that. Bitterly divided country. Blood has actually been shed. I've lost family members. My opposing enemy has lost family members. In the midst of that, Lincoln calls upon all the people of the Americas to unite their heart in thanksgiving to God. And he declared the first Thanksgiving to be that last Thursday of November. And in both of these contexts, whether it was the Pilgrims of the 1600s or the Americans severely divided by the Civil War of the 1800s, we learned that we need to give thanks for all that God has done for us. The Pilgrims were outcasts from their society. They were not even united in their own vision of what the new world should be like. And yet they gave thanks in times of difficulty as well as in times of plenty. In our day, I don't know if you feel it or not, but I'm fatigued. I'm fatigued by the polarization of our nation, by the fact that we seem to have very little ground to talk about the things that we disagree on, that we're so polarized that we make one another an enemy. We're not yet to the point of shedding blood, but at times it feels like we're that divided. I'm weary of that. I'm weary of this lingering disease. And then I remember that the people that landed at Plymouth Bluff 400 years ago, half of them died from starvation and disease. But I must admit, I'm weary. I'm emotionally tired during these times. I can't think of a season in my life when it would be more important for us to practice the discipline of thanksgiving, to pause and look at what we have to be grateful for, even in the midst of some very difficult circumstances that we're up against, some great disillusionment and disappointment that we have, that we pause and give thanks, no matter how dark the days are. I wonder if you could come up with a list of 10 things that you're grateful for. I'm serious. Could you just pull out a piece of paper or share with the person you're watching this message with and just start trying to rattle off at least 10 things for which you're grateful for? I found that when I did that in preparation for this message, I went from that sense of fatigue that I described a few minutes ago to suddenly it was a relief, a peace. The problems did not go away. The disappointment did not go away. The weariness did not go away. But a peace seemed to take center stage for a change. I remembered quickly things that I'm grateful for, like knowing Jesus and realizing that I will have a promised land of eternity in the future for me. I thought about the nurture of family and dear friends who've been good to me and faithful to me over the years. I thought about the health that I enjoy that allows me the opportunity to get out and go for a walk or to work. I thought quickly of the resources that I have available to me. There's plenty of food on the table, and many people around the world cannot say that. I thought about the safe shelter that I live in, that I'm not worried about being robbed as I step out the front door. So I thought about the sunshine that's been this week as we're recording this message, the sunshine that fell on my shoulders, the beauty of the leaves turning in this fall season. What majesty of that color that's out there now. And even the great joy I take in my family pet greeting me at the door with a wagging tail, always glad to see me. In the season of Thanksgiving, it's good for us to practice the discipline of gratitude. It reminds us of who we depend upon, the Lord Jesus, and that He's faithful to us. His unique love cannot be taken from us. He's on a great redemptive plan to rescue us from the bondage of the slavery of our sin. And that alone is enough to get us through any difficulty we might come upon. Deuteronomy 8:2 is a great passage for us to remember, where Moses says to the people of God, remember how the Lord your God led you all the way.
Well, hey, thanks for joining us for Church Online this week. We want to ask that if this sermon was encouraging or inspiring to you, that you would share it with a friend, because we know that whoever finds God finds life. We'll see you back here next week.